Good morning. I'm Anita Huberman. I'm President and CEO of the Surrey Board of Trade. I'm an honorary captain of the Royal Canadian Navy, appointed by the Defence Minister. I'd like to acknowledge that we're on the unceded territory of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Kwantlen, Katzie, Kaiket, Coquitlam, Semiahmoo, and Tawasin First Nations. As well, I acknowledge that we live and work on the land of the Inuit and Métis peoples. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us this morning on a very, very important topic related to our workforce portfolio, and that is really presenting to the business community a staffing solution for your business, ensuring that we have inclusion in our workplace and that we are offering equal opportunities with those persons with disabilities. Ladies and gentlemen, my apologies. The Surrey Board of Trade has a diversity, equity, and inclusion portfolio. You can check out all of our services and programs on our website at businessinsurrey.com. Ladies and gentlemen, events like this simply do not happen without the support of our sponsors. Thank you so much to our Business and International Trade Center sponsors, the law firm of Fasken, Scotiabank, BDC, the Business Development Bank of Canada, the Chambers of Commerce Group Insurance Plan represented by SNF Benefits, and Western Community College. Thank you so much for your support to the Surrey Board of Trade. I'd like to recognize Dan Coulter, MLA from Chilliwack, and he'll be introduced more formally shortly. And Stephanie Cadu, MLA for South Surrey. Thank you so much for joining us. Just some instructions before we begin. All attendees are muted. If you do have a question, please post your question in the chat function of the technology, and we'll get to your question during the question period. If we're unable to, we'll send you the answer by email following the conclusion of this session. Ladies and gentlemen, the Surrey Board of Trade, our whole mandate is to support business and bring business into this city. We are Surrey's city building business organization. We're one of the top 10 largest chambers and boards of trades in the country. There's 450 of us. We deliver a very unique and diverse value proposition to our members, the business community, and our stakeholders. Check out all of our programs, our research, our government advocacy, our trade relationships, creating global business connections for local businesses on our website at businessinsurrey.com. We are the concierge of connection, even in our workforce development portfolio, creating that bridge between employers and employees. I'd also like to mention we have Cindy Hayner with us this morning. She is a registered sign language interpreter in attendance to provide ASL for this event. Thank you so much, Cindy, for attending and providing that service to us and to our attendees. So ladies and gentlemen, when you think of and hear the word disability in the workplace, that phrase, what do you think? What do you hear? What is your perception? We always say at the Surrey Board of Trade that every single person matters in this economy, in this workforce. We are facing a significant skill shortage, labor shortage, but never before have we needed to ensure positive outcomes for every single person in our workforce that will benefit employers, benefit businesses, benefit our economy locally, nationally. Disabilities can be visible or they can be invisible, but we all know someone who has a disability. Reports estimate that 1 in 5 Canadians have a disability. For too long, businesses have focused on their outputs and lacked the oversight to build a more inclusive workforce. However, Now, more than ever, organizations realize that by not employing people with disabilities, they're missing out on a dynamic of talented, bold, loyal, innovative people in our workforce. A healthy workforce is reflected in our community. So, ladies and gentlemen, to tell you a little bit more about this foundational philosophy that we believe in at the Surrey Board of Trade through our policy work, through our service delivery, is Parliamentary Secretary for Accessibility for British Columbia. He was elected as the MLA for Chilliwack in 2020. He was a trustee on the Chilliwack Board of Education from 2013 to 2020 and acted as their chair from 2018 to 2020. Ladies and gentlemen, he served on the Mayor's Task Force on Inclusion, Diversity, and Accessibility. He's passionate about the rehabilitation of youth in the criminal justice system as well. He was a director for the Chilliwack Restorative Justice Society. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome MLA Dan Coulter. Dan, over to you.
Thank you very much, Anita, and hello everyone. And I'm really happy, and thank you very much for inviting me to join the Surrey Board of Trade this morning. I'd first like to begin by acknowledging to you today that I'm speaking from the traditional and unceded territory of the Stalo people, in particular that of the Puyallup and Chilkoot tribes. It's great to join you today to discuss the need for creating more diverse and inclusive workplaces in British Columbia and how raising awareness for these needs is vitally important. This past spring, our government introduced and passed the Accessible British Columbia Act. Before then, BC was one of the largest provinces in Canada without accessibility legislation. We modeled our legislation on what worked well in other jurisdictions and designed it to complement the Accessible Canada Act. It is enabling legislation and provides the framework for identifying, removing, and preventing barriers for folks living with disabilities. And we've used a broad definition of disability to ensure anyone with a disability is captured. And a barrier is also defined broadly as not limited to physical barriers, because we know barriers can also emerge from attitudes, policies, or practices. In addition, we have accountability measures built into the legislation. Government and prescribed organizations must produce a forward-looking accessibility plan and establish an accessibility committee and a feedback mechanism. We are committed to implementing the requirements of the Act, guided by the principle, nothing about us without us, and guided by the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. After the Accessible British Columbia Act came into force, our first order of business was to advertise expressions of interest for the Provincial Accessibility Committee. And I'm pleased to say that we received a high level of response in the committee and have selected an amazing group of people with a broad range of skills and experiences. The committee is comprised of 11 members and reflects the diversity of British Columbians. It includes people with disabilities, individuals and organizations that support people with disabilities, and Indigenous representation. Committee will also provide advice and recommendations to government and will help develop accessibility standards. And the committee recently had its first meeting, which was super exciting, and all members are keen to get to work. So the Act lists some areas where accessibility standards will be developed, such as employment and built environment, but it is not an exhaustive list. The order in which these standards are prioritized is still to be developed, but we expect each standard could take at least 2 years to develop. That's what's happened in other places in Canada. But we will also look to expedite the development whenever possible, because we can use other standards that have been developed in Canada if it makes sense for British Columbia. Now, much like the work we're doing at the provincial level, the President's Group is working to raise awareness and remove barriers at the organizational level. As you might know, the President's Group is a group of business leaders working toward their goal of making British Columbia the province with the highest rate of employment for people with disabilities in Canada by 2030. As business leaders, you know very well that to be successful at a goal, it's important to be able to measure what you want to improve. And that's true of diversity and inclusion in the workplace. That's why the President's Group Make It Count guide is so important. It can show you how to measure for disability inclusion in organizations like yours, so that we can reach that goal of having the highest rate of employment for people with disabilities and be able to prove it. There are also a few interesting statistics in the guide, including the first pledge to measure numbers. The 21 participating employers, which comprise almost 50,000 employees here in BC, there were 110 senior leaders who self-identify as having a disability. A similar survey in the UK in 2021 reported zero senior leaders who self-identify as having a disability. In case you're wondering, the rate of working age people with a disability in the UK is similar to BC, which is 20.5%. Well, there are many factors behind that data, including whether employees felt comfortable self-identifying or disclosing a disability, particularly an invisible disability. I think it's not greatly understood how beneficial it can be to hire folks with disabilities. In 2021, the Ministry of Social Development and Poverty Reduction provided $4.8 million to Small Business BC and the President's Group to support employees to hire, rehire, and retain people with disabilities for long-term successful employment. And part of that funding was dedicated to workplace accessibility grants. Small businesses are able to apply for up to $1,000 to remove physical and communication and other barriers. It's important funding because statistics prior to the pandemic showed almost 30,000 British Columbians with disabilities were unemployed but wanted to work. People with disabilities don't have barriers in their way and are providing equal opportunities. They're able to prove what an asset they can be. Right now, with so many sectors in BC experiencing staffing shortages, passionate and talented employees are desperately needed. Beyond just filling gaps, hiring people with disabilities is cost effective, even considering any costs of necessary accommodations, which more than half the time actually don't cost anything. It's also cost effective because employees with disabilities tend to stay with a company longer and have both better attendance and better performance than employees without disabilities. Hiring people with disabilities also helps to meet or exceed financial goals, enhance creativity, and helps with change management. Surrey, as a municipality, is continually leading the pack in regard to innovation and expecting better. We know that changing hiring practices also has a social impact that extends beyond your organization and into Surrey and throughout the province. And that social impact is also part of the reason I do the work I do, because building a barrier-free BC creates more resilient communities where everyone has the opportunity to succeed. And that's better for all of us. And so thank you very much for having me here today. I look forward to hearing the other speakers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dan, and we'll get right back to you during the question period. And now it's my pleasure to recognize and introduce the Senior Accessibility Consultant from the President's Group, Mr. Yat Lee. Yat, over to you.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Anita, and thank you so much, PS Dan Coulter, for the really important welcoming remarks. And as I like to do now, I want to really also compliment my my speaking here this morning with a couple of slides, just to be be more interactive here and then get our blood flows going while we talk about accessibility. And my screen should be showing on right now. And good morning, everyone. My name is Yat, and I'm the Senior Accessibility Consultant at the President's Group. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I'm located in the ancestral and unceded homelands of the Hunkaminam and Squamish-speaking peoples. For visual descriptions, I am Asian, I have black hair, wear a blue shirt, and today I'm using an assistive device to participate equitably in this very meaningful event. And as I go into sharing who and what the President's Group is, I'd like to also preface and start the conversation by letting you know that I'm deaf and hard of hearing. I'm a person with a disability, born with a condition called microtia, where I don't have outer ears. I wear a bone conduction hearing aid to hear. And I'm grateful for business leaders who I've worked with in the past to give me gainful employment as I navigated the intersections of my disability, especially about self-disclosure, which will be something we'll cover this morning. Now about the President's Group. The President's Group is a network of 25 change-driven BC business leaders who are champions for more accessible, inclusive workplaces. And these 25 change-driven BC leaders include business leaders from large organizations, such as names you may be very familiar with, organizations and institutions like the University of British Columbia. We have Santa Ono on our steering committee membership. We have BC Hydro, to mid-sized organizations like KPMG, SAP, to small organizations like YVR and LetCorp. The companies I mentioned should all be familiar to some of you on this call. And if you've flown out of YVR, you'll have come across their staff, volunteers, and also their wide accessible corridors and pathways. So as we continue on this morning, what is the mission at the President's Group, and why should you connect with me and the President's Group immediately after this session? Well, I'm happy to tell you why this morning. The President's Group models and champions inclusive employment practices to make really what P.S. Coulter mentioned this morning is to make accessibility a hallmark of how British Columbia does business. And our really big, hairy, audacious goal is by 2030 that we can measure 51,000 more people with disabilities in British Columbia have appropriate employment that fulfills their work potential and the needs of our labor market. Now, you might ask a couple of big questions, and you might have questions for me down later this morning, but I know there are many business leaders attending this morning. I see some familiar names from the attendance list, and thank you for joining this morning. And some of you may be a bit further along your diversity and inclusion journey, and some of you may be at the start. But no matter where you are on this journey, one of the common questions I get asked is this one here. Why yet? Why are we focusing and making progress on diversity and inclusion at a time when the world seems so divisive and polarized, especially with all the news going on about our global pandemic and et cetera? 3 reasons. I can tell you 3 reasons I'll try this morning. It's inevitable, there's progress being made, and it's necessary. So diversity is inevitable. The measure of our public attitudes over the past 50 years, when we take a look at Surrey, our community here, it reflects a growing awareness, tolerance, and acceptance of greater diversity. Organizations are now asking less about the value of diversity and inclusion, instead wanting to know how to embed inclusiveness into what they do. So businesses are now building inclusiveness into their day-to-day interactions and team environment. So these are more or less overt processes and strategies and decisions. And one of which you can make immediate changes on is having captions on your Zoom meetings, having American Sign Language interpreting, like having Cindy at your events as well. So by being on this platform this morning, you're really taking either a first step or taking another giant step towards inclusiveness in your organization. So what's in it for you? And what can the President's Group do for me, for you? We have resources, as P.S. Coulter mentioned earlier, that we can give you to empower you on this disability inclusion journey. And that means providing you with free logins and access to our 5-part course called Creating an Accessible Workplace. This 5-part course is designed to be done in 30-minute modules, which learners can take at their own pace at our e-learning platform. It covers key topics like legal requirements and terminology, practical information about accommodations, which have all been vetted by lawyers and occupational therapists. It also goes into descriptions of common workplace barriers, structural, attitudinal, and culture, all of which you as employers today potentially can address. And the course also has interviews with employees and employers as well. So this course is designed for operational managers, HR managers, and anyone involved in the hiring process or progress. And this training is available for free to BC employers who are part of the President's Group or part of the Community of Accessible Employers, which is free to join. Now, before I hop off and pass it on to Marco, I want to really end off by sharing a few numbers and stats this morning. In our research, we found that a diverse and inclusive workplace have better business outcomes. These organizations are 2 times more likely to meet or exceed financial targets. They're 6 times more likely to be innovative, 6 times more likely to be effectively anticipate change. And these numbers are very, very encouraging. As our demographic trends towards more multicultural societies, more participation of people with disabilities in the workplace, it's provided more opportunity for people. And the goal at the end of the day is to include everyone, to create a climate that is inclusive, barrier-free, and to create talent acquisition and management processes that are inclusive and fair. And finally, people with disabilities are tremendous employees. There's often a stigma that people with disabilities require a lot of upfront capital, expenditures for accommodations. And there's also a myth that they may be unreliable or tardy. I want you to get that out of your head if that was something that was preconceived in your mindset, because that is far, far from the truth. From research, we found that 72% of people with disabilities have higher staff retention. That means you don't need to spend money on marketing recruitment dollars. And 86% had equivalent or better attendance than their peers. And 90% perform equal or better than their coworkers. So with those data, we can start recognizing that diversity is already here, present in Surrey businesses in many levels. And now the challenge is to mirror meritocracy with inclusion and diversity. So that means creating a culture of inclusion to allow a diverse population move along the lines of leadership, power innovation, and to generate measurable revenue. And to be part of our accessible employers, you can sign up through our website, accessibleemployers.ca. Right back to you, Anita. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yat. And our final speaker, ladies and gentlemen, this morning, he is the accessibility consultant, just an inspiring speaker and entrepreneur. Please help me welcome Marco Pasqua. Marco, over to you.
Thanks so much, Anita, and thank you everyone for joining us here today. Yes, my name is Marco Pasqua, and for a bit of a visual description, behind me there is a red wall with a bunch of superhero and Back to the Future paraphernalia on the walls and memorabilia. It's a great pleasure for me to be here today, not only as an accessibility consultant and inspirational speaker, but also as a resident of the City of Surrey. I've lived in the City of Surrey practically my entire life. I was raised here, And why this subject matter today matters most to me actually is because I'm also a person with a disability. You can probably, for those of you who are able to see, you can probably see that I have a manual wheelchair next to me here, and I have a disability called cerebral palsy. And in my case, it's called spastic triplegia, meaning it affects my 2 legs and my right arm. So my right arm is affected in its dexterity. And growing up, my parents didn't raise me to be an inspirational speaker out the gate. Okay. In fact, I actually actively avoided talking about my disability and talking about my experiences because I wanted to be respected as a person first. And so I struggled a lot through my life and kind of figuring out what I wanted to do with my life and my career. And through a series of events, it came very clear to me that my calling was to actually go out there and to share my lived experience with other people so that they can better understand how they can truly be more inclusive through their actions. I avoided the accessibility topic a lot, actually. And it was actually through a lot of things that happened in my life that I was able to work alongside one of my biggest mentors, somebody I looked up to my entire life and had a poster of him on my wall as a kid, Rick Hansen, the man in motion. So for those of you who remember, Rick is the guy who wheeled around the world in his wheelchair in the mid-'80s to raise money for spinal cord injury research. And although I was never impacted by a spinal cord injury, I was impacted by the story of Rick as a guy from BC who was really out there doing what he could to raise his voice and raise awareness for why accessibility mattered. Now, I didn't know at the time, but that would later impact how I would kind of steer my career path. And one thing led to another. And I actually got the opportunity to work alongside Rick. So he went from this guy who was a poster on my wall to now somebody that I was able to work with. And Rick taught me something very valuable. And that's the difference between accessibility and what we call meaningful access. Now, many of you have probably heard of accessibility. You know, we think that we may have an accessible location or workplace, somebody to come and work because we have flush entryways or doors, easy for somebody in a wheelchair to get into. But it's so much more when you think about meaningful access. You see, accessibility to you might mean, well, we have one entrance where everyone can get into, but that's got a bunch of stairs. But don't worry, we have a back entrance that is completely flush, just the way I described. But the thing is, it happens to be next to a dumpster and it happens to have no covering. So if I were to come to your workplace, in a rainy day, like it typically is in Surrey, and I had to wait outside of this delivery entrance or delivery door, and I was now drenched on and poured on, which has happened to my wife and I for several events where we call ahead and we say, is your location accessible? And they'd say, yes, not letting us know that there's a special door, a special entry, a special way that I need to be treated. I want you to know that people with disabilities don't necessarily need to be treated special. We just need to be treated equally alongside everyone else. And that's the difference with meaningful access. You might have that entryway, but meaningful access means that I'm able to enter a facility, enter a workplace, and navigate and work with all of the elements exactly as anyone else is. And I don't have to think about it. I don't have to adapt to the environment, but rather the environment has adapted to me. Now, one of the other things that Rick has taught me is the idea of using person-first language. Now, this isn't something that is necessarily something that everyone identifies with, so I want to make that clear. But I like to call myself a person with a disability, not a disabled person, putting my humanity first. Now, in different regions of the world, say the United Kingdom, there's a lot of preference for identity first, so disabled person, because they're proud of being part of the disabled community. But I too am proud to be part of the persons with disabilities community, and I like to use person first language. So that's a little bit of a different sort of understanding for you. And if you're unclear when you're meeting somebody about what they prefer, just like anything, I feel like it's okay to have an honest and open and authentic conversation with somebody. And if it comes up in passing, then that's great. Now, let's talk a little bit about what Yat was mentioning in terms of activating a workforce of persons with disabilities. Now, there is an entrepreneur out of Ontario by the name of Mark Wafer. Now, I'm sure there's a lot of you here today who may have heard of Mark's story, but Mark is somebody who is of the hard of hearing and deaf community himself. But he's a very successful business owner. He owns several Tim Hortons locations. And when he started these locations, he wanted to prove that you could activate a workforce of persons with disabilities by simply making very simple changes to your work environment. And I was really moved by Mark's story because I've heard him talk before. I've met him in person once or twice. And an amazing thing happened. I learned about what he did to change his environment. You see, at Tim Hortons, you've got all your orders that are up and you've got to make sure that you're expediting and getting them out quickly. And typically, from what I understand, there's a beeping noise when an order is up or you're going to be late for an order that has been waiting for a while, say in a drive-through. Now, that beeping noise doesn't necessarily do anything for the people who are part of the deaf or hard of hearing community. So what did Mark do? He simply adapted his environment by installing a light. I think it was a red light, that when that beeping noise would go off, there would also be a visual indication, a red light that would turn on. And so he was able to actually hire employees who are part of the deaf and hard of hearing community. And the advantage that he found by hiring these individuals with the disability is that compared to their counterparts who potentially were part of the hearing community, because they were deaf, because they weren't able to necessarily have as many sidebar conversations, those individuals were uber focused on what it is that they were doing. And so they were doing their tasks, getting them done and getting them out the door as quick as possible and beating that red light before it went off. Now, that's just a small example of how you can adapt your environment with a couple dollars worth of a light to make it more adaptable and accessible to persons with disabilities. And Mark often speaks about these advantages in the talks that he's given. Now, I want to come full circle before I finish my piece here and talk about my relationship with the City of Surrey. I have worked really hard to highlight some of the benefits that the City of Surrey has done over the years. I started out just as another community member, going to the Guildford Recreation Gym, working out. I started out as a para-athlete in wheelchair basketball, track and field, horseback riding, all of these things. So I had to very much always keep myself in shape. And being a Surrey resident, I had to go to the gym. Now, years and years ago, I remember going to Guildford Rec and befriending one of the clerks that was at the counter. Her name was Tara Cleve. Now, Tara, she didn't know me from anyone else in the community, but the difference is that she bothered to get to know me and who I was. And over the years, with me going into the gym almost every day, we started to talk to one another. And you'd think that that's where the relationship would end. And for some people, maybe it would. Well, I'm happy to say, flash forward years later, about 2014 or so, from when I was about 16, 17 to now, almost in my 30s at this time. And Tara, she actually finds my email and she emails me and says, "You may remember me from your time of going to the gym. Well, now I'm the accessibility and support services manager for the City of Surrey. And I've seen the work that you've done with the Rick Hansen Foundation. How would you like to put that work into action at the City of Surrey?" So by making a meaningful connection with me, Tara remembered me from years earlier, knew the work I was doing in impacting in accessibility and inclusion, and she wanted me to have an involvement with the City of Surrey. So I'm happy to say that I started part-time and working with the City of Surrey while running my business as an accessibility consultant to help the city implement hiring policies and strategies that were implemented citywide. And we also started to introduce what the Rick Hansen Foundation was doing in terms of accessibility certification. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in the Q&A portion of things. But all this story to wrap around is never undervalue the connections that you're making in your community. Never undervalue that one person that may be coming into your store or your business who may identify with having a disability, or maybe not. Maybe they have an invisible disability, but do value the fact that they're coming to your business, that they're giving you an opportunity to provide them a service, because you never know what that ripple effect will create in the future. And Tara and I are still friends to this day. I still support the City of Surrey to this day. And in fact, she was the one who asked me to come in her place today to speak to all of you. Not only that, but you want to talk about full circle. My wife is now on mat leave because we have our first child who's 10 months old now, but she's the Universal Design and Accessibility Specialist at the City of Surrey, my wife. And who is her manager? Pericles. So I just wanted to show you that the world is a lot smaller than we think it is, and that the impact that you can create by creating an environment that is more inclusive for persons with disabilities may impact you for years to come. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you so much, Marco. And you're so inspiring every time I hear you speak. Such a pleasure to have you join us this morning. So let's move on to the question period. And Dan and Yat, if you can turn on your cameras. And ladies and gentlemen, if you do have a question, please post it in the chat function of the technology, and we will get to it. My first question is actually to Dan. You know, the BC budget is coming forth. The throne speech is next week, I believe, and then the BC budget the week after. Tell me, if you can, what your goals are, what you want to see out of the BC budget when it comes to workforce investments on accessibility, inclusiveness, ensuring that persons with disabilities have access for workforce opportunities.
Thank you very much for the question, Anita. I probably can't give a very comprehensive answer on what the budget will look like. I don't know myself, but I can say that the government has been investing in creating a more diverse and inclusive and accessible workplace and workforce. You know, we like the investment I talked about at the beginning there, the $1,000 investment in small businesses to make their workplaces more accessible. We had a work experience opportunities grant, which was given to nonprofits and small businesses to hire folks with disabilities. We had that was last spring. So I'm sure we will continue to make those investments. I can't say for sure what they're going to be or what that budget's going to look like.
I just had to ask. We're going to be in the budget lockup, so just had to ask that. But thank you so much for responding. Just a question from the audience, either for Yat or Marco, in that order. Are there programs or service providers in BC that can help employers be more inclusive? And are these programs expensive for employers to take part in? So Yat, over to you first.
Thank you. You know, it's a great question, Nate. Obviously, there are workplace accessibility grants provincially via the Small Business of BC. These grants are up to $1,000, and they can be used for you to update your environments, your structural environments, for example, adding ramps, lighting levels, all the way to what I spoke about earlier about attitudes like anti-bias training, and also policy, so funding for legal and consultation advices as well. So, you know, I encourage you to head over to Small Business BC for the Workplace Accessibility Grant, which I'll include in the link in the chat box as well. And federally as well, there's CCRW, which can provide additional funding for these accessibility opportunities.
Marco, anything to add?
Yeah, well, so Nate, you'd be very familiar with the Neil Squire Society. And I speak about the Neil Squire Society because when I was a consultant with the President's Group, similar to Yat, I was blown away because I was housed at the head offices of Van City Credit Union in downtown Vancouver in my consulting role. And when I was being onboarded, I was blown away by the experience of Van City Credit Union actually working with Neil Squire Society as part of the onboarding experience. As a person with a disability, I'd never been part of an onboarding experience where they asked me, well, let's actually have an occupational therapist come in, talk to you about what the role is going to look like, and see if we can support you in any capacity. And I was like, I thought they were doing the token thing of, oh, he has a disability, so let's have that happen. Well, I found out that this was actually a rolled out program that they were doing with every single new employee that was onboarded, whether they identified with having a disability or not. And it was crazy and awesome to have this occupational therapist meet with me and think of ideas and adaptions that I never would have thought of for myself, like moving the monitor from having it on a pedestal to having it on an arm that I could bring a little bit closer to me, or having a laptop stand that I could hold on to my lap while I was wheeling around in my wheelchair. These are never things that I would have brought forward, but these programs and services provided by Neil Squire specifically, little shout out to your organization, Nate, actually, I have to say is incredible. I know that you're also working very closely with Work BC, and there's other great programs that are out there as well. So I would highly recommend for individuals to look into the programs that are out there. I would even suggest, I'll plug Nate a little bit. Reach out to Nate. He does incredible programs there with Neil Squire, and reach out and see what is available to you. Because especially now that we're working remotely, we have to look at accommodations in the workplace completely differently. And I'll end it there.
Sorry, go ahead. The average cost from our research for accommodations is $500, and within those grants of $1,000, you can on average be able to cover those costs. For example, for ergonomic mouses, mice, keyboards, or even for this assistive tech that I join on, participate in every webinar and conference, this only costs $300. So
Wow.
Just think about the opportunities that you'd be able to provide and to enable this group to be able to do. So I just wanted to echo that. Sorry, Anita.
I just wanted to ask Yat and Marco, and even Dan, if you have a perspective on, the economy, it seems really fragile. We're facing a skills shortage, a labor shortage. Surrey has the greatest number of manufacturers in British Columbia. We have a very diverse industry base. Can you tell me just, very succinctly, each of you, beginning with Yat, Marco, then Dan, why is hiring inclusively so important to our economy today and leading into the future? Yat?
Thank you. All members of the President's Group see the opportunity here offered by what we call an untapped talent pool. We mentioned earlier that nearly 620,000 working age British Columbians have a disability. And in fact, before the COVID-19 outbreak, at least 28,000 people with disabilities were unemployed and wanted to work. That's why we need to continue to tap into this pool while we see the lasting impacts of COVID-19. So to continue to be able to arm them with opportunities, with employment, and it's very likely that this community, this untapped talent pool, has lost their jobs initially during the pandemic. So it's now time to tap into this untapped labor pool to be able to use these resources and to get them back into the employment realm there.
Marco, your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's really, really important at a time, especially like today, where we recognize any potential barriers that are preventing individuals from joining the workforce. And I think that by, as Yat says, tapping into this untapped talent force, you're getting opportunities to work with individuals who potentially have never been recognized for their abilities, but rather potentially have been focused on for their disability. And you don't know that you actually have, for lack of a better term, a diamond in the rough who's been waiting for the opportunity to show you what they are made of. So this is exactly where you get those statistics of productivity, of innovation. As a person with a disability myself, I've had to adapt and innovate my entire life, because so you could say that I've been training for the COVID-19 pandemic since the day I was born. As far as adaptability, when COVID first hit, I didn't know how that was going to impact my business, but you know what I did? I pivoted quickly. And I think that the businesses that are the most successful are the ones that recognize their gaps and understand how talent forces that can come in and are ready to work. All you have to do is saying, yes, we accept you in our workplace and we're ready to have you bring your talents to our workforce. So that would be my take.
And Dan, we know that BC's economic plan is going to be released this month by Minister Kalon. Now, we met with him last year to provide our perspective and input. What's your perspective on this topic?
Well, I talk to employers across all sectors quite often, and there's one thing that they are all talking about, and that's a labor shortage, whether that's trouble hiring enough folks to operate their businesses or actually retention. And folks with disabilities are a huge untapped labor pool. And like the statistics that myself and have said, folks with disabilities are retained much longer within businesses, and so you can use simple adaptive technology like Marco and Yad have been talking about, and you could hire someone and keep them for much longer. And I think I think looking at this untapped labor pool and hiring folks with disabilities and having policies of diversity inclusion in your business are going to improve your business. But overall, if more people are doing that, it'll improve the economy and the economic outlook as well.
I just wanted to mention in the chat function, the University of Victoria is engaging in a provincial strategy to support improved outcomes for youth job seekers whom experience disability. So I think it's going to be a very good guiding document for government. I just have another question, actually. Larger businesses are part of the president's group. But what about small businesses? They're 98% of BC's economy. They don't have the same resources as large businesses. How can they, with their limited resources, ensure they're part of the diversity, equity, inclusion, economic paradigm to ensure that they also can hire persons with disabilities? Is all of that possible for a small business with limited resources? Marco, what do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's absolutely possible. I would say that for a small business, it's about recognizing that it's one thing to have a diversity and inclusion statement on your website if you have a small mom and pop pie shop, for example, or a small business. It's another thing to then be about it in your community. People want to go to places where they feel reflected. So if your budget is limited, I think the first thing you need to remove is any attitudinal barriers or stigmas that you may present towards persons with disabilities first. Then bring in individuals with disabilities in your recruitment process by actually saying that you're open to having accommodations during that recruitment piece, and actually open up the forum for them to tell you what would make it easier for them to be active participants in your workplace. Then finally, once they're onboarded and working with you, allow that person to tell you what supports have made them successful in the past. And that doesn't necessarily mean installing a brand new automated door or a ramp, but really changes to your own internal policies, which allow that person to adapt their work environment to something that works for them. Then get your team involved, because if you don't set the tone from the top at the upper leadership level, the rest of your fellow employees are not going to follow suit. So that would probably be the easiest thing, is remove those stigmas and attitudinal barriers first, and let the person with the disability be the expert to help guide you through that process as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, your perspective.
Thank you so much. And I get really excited when I talk about small businesses, because they're heartbeat of British Columbia. And like you said, 98% of small businesses represent the economy in British Columbia. We have many small businesses leaders in our presence group as well. But like what Marco mentioned, start from the beginning. Start from making adjustments to your storefront or your digital storefront, such as including alt text. So it increases accessibility. Inclusion really starts from your storefront. And there's also, more than ever, social value. It's vital to have social value to your brand. And while diversity at one point was a point of distinction for companies, is now rapidly becoming a point of admission to the market. So being able to measure and report on your company's employment of people with disabilities is a valuable proof on your commitment to providing social value as a business. So at any time as well, too, small businesses are welcome to communicate with myself and the President's Group to obtain more resources like our e-learning courses as well.
Dan, do you think the BC government itself, as a significant workforce in our province, is a leader, or is it becoming a leader in hiring persons with disabilities?
I absolutely think it is a leader. We are, through our consultation leading up to the Accessible British Columbia Act, we clearly heard from everyone, folks living with disabilities, the business community, the just regular British Columbians, that they'd like to see government lead, be a leader on accessibility. And that's where we're starting when it comes to the Accessible BC Act, but we're developing right now an accessibility plan throughout government. And absolutely, we are, and we will continue to be a leader in employing folks with disabilities.
Thank you, Dan. Yet, a question from the audience relates to really ensuring that there's resources available to persons with disabilities to help them find work. What are these resources?
There's resources, and those are resources I included in that link over there to connect with service providers, connect with disability employment service providers like BC Partners in workforce innovation, or if you're looking for neurodiverse talent, connect with Focus FP as well. We work with many service providers from the deaf and hard of hearing spectrum to among other communities to ensure there's equitable employment. So definitely be in touch with the disability employment service providers to hire persons with disability for your organization.
Marco, do you have a perspective on any additional resources?
Yeah, I would say, well, certainly, as mentioned, accessibleemployers.ca. I also know that hirefortalent.ca, that's FOR talent.ca, hire for talent, HIRE. They are very good at also focusing on small and medium-sized businesses, and that's also available across Canada. Thanks, Yat, for sharing the link as well. I've worked very closely with them, and in fact, I actually wrote some resources for them recently on the accommodations process of persons with disabilities. But for those individuals with disabilities who are looking for more support, I would echo what Yat says about connecting with your local service providers and potentially even disability groups that you identify with. That's not necessarily a be-all end-all for your experience. Like, for example, I work very closely with the Cerebral Palsy Association of BC. I have CP, I'm actually their spokesperson, but that doesn't necessarily mean you have to go to those identity groups in order to find the resources that make sense for you. I would say learn about your own talents and skill sets, and you can apply your skill sets of what you learned in terms of overcoming challenges to the workforce for someone else, or you can do what I did and become an entrepreneur as well and become part of the small business community, providing a service as a person with a disability to those employers and helping them understand your perspectives.
Yet, my question to you is, you had mentioned earlier on in some commentary about, if you do have a person with disability in the workplace, sometimes they become that token person that knows everything. There's a lot of pressure on that person. How can we delineate that pressure to ensure a more positive workforce culture where everyone can appreciate the value of everyone and really minimize that frustration?
Thank you for asking that question. I think that comes to education, that comes to equity, is why are we trying to think that this is a token of hiring? In fact, it shouldn't be perceived that way. In fact, these employees and staff are all equal in terms of how they be able to represent in the organization. So I think it comes to attitudinal barriers sometimes as well. That's why I think these e-learning courses highlights the importance of obviously anti-racism, being able to highlight attitudinal barriers that might impede someone from moving up along the leadership ranks as well. Just because someone has a disability doesn't mean they can't be in a very executive or leadership level role as well. So those e-learning content highlights that, and I think that's something we need to be able to focus on and be able to share is education about this.
So Dan, my final question is to you. How are you working with other provinces, to really ensure that this topic of hiring inclusively, hiring persons with disabilities, the work that you're doing on the accessibility legislation, to ensure that Canada as a nation is a leader?
Great question. So our accessibility secretariat and our government is constantly working with their colleagues across Canada, and an organization called Accessibility Standards Canada, in order to create sort of, so that each province isn't a mishmash of different rules, to create some sort of standardization across Canada for accessibility. And we are also, at the moment, British Columbia, we're also helping other provinces that are interested in developing their own accessibility legislation. We're giving them a hand, since we are the most recent province to pass accessibility legislation. So we kind of have the institutional memory is pretty fresh with us. So we are helping out other provinces there as well.
So ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our session this morning. Thank you so much to Yat, to Dan, to Marco. They are a team of influential leaders in British Columbia, changing this paradigm to ensure that persons with disabilities are hired in the workplace, that we are shifting our thinking to ensure positive outcomes for every single British Columbian. Ladies and gentlemen, we have some great programs. Check us out at businessinsurrey.com. Tomorrow, we have BDC's chief economist giving his economic forecast outlook. And on February 9th is our digital Business in Surrey new member induction. On February 15th is a Metro Vancouver update focused on critical infrastructure for our region with board chair Sav Dhaliwal. And I also wanted to mention that we have a very special digital launch event on February 11th. Check it out on our website at businessinsurrey.com with Canada's Minister of Small Business, Mary Ng. I won't say any more than that, but it's a very significant economic announcement with the Surrey Board of Trade. So ladies and gentlemen, with that, if you have any questions, please let me know. You can reach me at Anita@businessinsurrey.com. Make it a great business day.